Hi guys, how are you doing today? Hope you're all doing well. Something that I've struggled with pretty much my entire life is my emotions and my sensitivity, and how that can make life difficult when you're expected to kind of play the game of male bonding, let's say. So what I mean by that is, or rather, the kinds of bonding that are expected of you amongst people that aren't like you, or don't quite get you, or just kind of not the kinds of people you would typically want to be around, or you might not necessarily like, you might not respect, or maybe you just don't quite understand them. Whatever the case may be, you know, there are many situations in life in which I found myself in positions where I've had to almost pretend to be someone that I wasn't. You know, I felt this sense of pressure to conform, this sense of pressure to be funny, to be witty, to be, clever in my responses to people, and while that does apply to men and women, I think with men there's always, as I've spoken about before, there's always an element of competition, or as ego posturing. There's always an element of that going on, and so there's always this sense of, everyone's kind of like weighing each other up and judging each other. And sometimes it can make conversations with men humorous, fun at times, but also for someone like me, kind of exhausting. I think like most people, I have a sense of humor, but I think there's always a sense of pressure amongst men. There's always a sense that you have to prove yourself all the time. You have to prove your worth, and prove your place in the pecking order. Now, some people might not think that exists, but it does. It always exists. No matter how friendly you are with someone, people always expect you in some way to know your place in that particular dynamic with whoever it might be. But especially when there's a group of men that all have their own insecurities and all have their emotional issues. And so, in the end, it's not just about this sense of competition, it's a sense of batting off, deflecting away anything that could potentially make one appear to be emotionally vulnerable. And I think a lot of it comes down to perceived weakness by other men. There's a sense of the potential of losing respect, losing power in that dynamic. Or being seen as the the one that potentially could bring the whole could just deconstruct the whole dynamic of what's really going on, and I think humour is one of those ways in which I think a lot of male based relationships tend to operate on. It's bonding. Male bonding happens, generally speaking, through humour, through some kind of sort of outsourcing of how would I put it? I think generally speaking, men tend to funnel or to they put their emotions out there, but they don't do it directly. They put their emotions through some kind of medium, rather than it being on a platter for people to see, to feel, or potentially feel, or to examine. It's often pushed into something else. And that's essentially kind of what male bonding a lot of the time is really about. It's about being emotionally vulnerable, but in a way that in a way that I think men feel comfortable doing. So whether that's bonding over a football match, or whether that's, I don't know, taking the mickey out of each other, whether that's, being competitive in some way, or just getting together and doing silly things, just kind of. I think for a lot of men, humour is the most acceptable form of emotional outbursts. I think without some kind of a kind of third party, like, what would you call it? Some kind of a medium in which to put those emotions into. Most men, I don't think, would really probably want to have much to do with other men. It's only because that men kind of, they have these kind of unspoken rules between them, these unspoken expectations that, we don't go beyond a certain point. We talk about things to a certain extent, but we don't go past this point. It's not so much about boundaries. It's more about that there's a point in which I'm not going to be perceived as the prey in this group. I'm not going to be perceived as the weak one. I'm not going to be perceived as the one, and I'm not going to let others ridicule me and mock me, and inevitably let me lose respect and face in this social group, social situation involving other men. And so humour is a way to bat off, is to defend yourself, is to be, is a kind of protective medium. And you could also argue in many ways that also sports and other forms of bonding, whether it's gaming, I don't know, whether it's talking about women, whether it's, I don't know, driving somewhere, smoking together, drinking together, gambling, whatever it is that men typically do together. It's often a protective way to. It's a form of protection. It's a form of. It's a way of saying that where we are all equal until a certain point. We're all equal unless somebody says this or somebody gets too emotional, and then you go down in the ranking system. So to be emotional as a man among male companionship is seen as, or potentially could be seen as a disruptor, a form of disruption to the stability of that group in some sense. To be too honest, to be too real, to be too open, to be too sensitive, is to be seen as, potentially damaging. And so often then people either kind of distance themselves from that person or treat them as collateral damage in some way or other. And that's typically how a lot of male friendships tend to work. You know, they're dominated by usually one or two of the most, you know, extroverted of the group. And then you've got others that might be a mix of extroversion, introversion, and then you've usually got, you know, one or two introverts in there. And, you know, at the end of the day, also, it comes down to people's insecurities, I think. I think men are deeply insecure, and women know that. Women often prey on that. Women tend to be a lot more emotionally manipulative, but also in some ways more emotionally direct than men are. And so men suppress their emotions for the sake of stability, for the sake of often because they want to protect others, but also because they want to protect themselves. You know, I think it's extremely difficult for men to be completely open and honest with other men about how they're feeling, and that's why a lot of times men often, you know, I think that's why a lot of men prefer female therapists. That's why men like female company, because it gives them an opportunity to express a part of themselves that they can't, that they're suppressing, and they feel in a straitjacket a lot of their lives, I think. And so they go looking for an outlet to be able to express themselves in a way that's more seen as more acceptable, socially or culturally more acceptable. You know? Even with your own siblings, even with your own brothers, even with your own father, you know, it's seen as kind of, I don't know about other parts of the world, but I would say, generally speaking, in the West, there's this sense that you're supposed to suppress your emotions. You're supposed to always maintain a degree of self-control over one's emotions and one's thoughts consistently. And to show any kind of emotion is to be potentially seen as somebody that's worthy of disrespect. Now, I understand to a certain point that it can be very useful in some circumstances for that to. I think there's a place and a time for when it's often better to just kind of play along and to not kind of reveal too much of yourself, to kind of be a bit more reserved, to be a bit more, maybe even somewhat repressed in some ways. But I also think that tends to lead to a lot of toxic dynamics between men. And, you know, when you're talking about, you know, men are very, very competitive, and women are too, but just we express that in different ways. You know, it's among men, it's often about being seen as the strongest or the smartest or the fastest or the best at something. Whereas with, I would say typically with women, it's more about the status of one's attractiveness, the level of one's sexual appeal, all of that. That's to some extent that kind of crosses over between men and women. So I would say that in the end, it's always about status. It's always about maintaining a certain level of respect from people, and to let your guard down is potential to be seen as some kind of problem, some to be seen as too dramatic, too open, too honest. And so as I say, you kind of expect, whoever the dominant ones are in any given friendship, there's usually an element of that dynamic in which one person tends to sacrifice a bit of their own personality, a bit of their own, some of their own needs for the sake of that other person, because I think most friendships are there's an imbalance. There's often an unspoken kind of dynamic of power, of respect. Usually one probably respects the other more than the other person. One looks up to one more than the other person. One has more resources than the other person, probably, on average, at least in some way. Or one has more friends than the other person does. So it's often about a status thing. It's seeking approval. It's seeking validation. It's this thing of, if you stay in your lane, if you stay in your place, then that dynamic will continue to go on. But the moment you step out of line, the moment you start to reveal what's really going on in any kind of given dynamic with people, is the moment that people don't want anything to do with you, because you're a perceived threat. You're a threat to that dynamic. You're a threat in some way, and people don't like that. People like you to stay in your lane. People like you to know your place in the pecking order. And people might say, "Oh, I don't really think that exists." Well, it does. It does exist. It's just one of those, as I've mentioned in quite a few videos, that it's very common among people overall, but with men, I would say it's even more prevalent. And it's not an easy thing to accept, because you want to think that your friends are your equals, don't you? You want to think that even your siblings are your equals. But let's face the truth. Even with your own family, there is always a kind of an imbalance there in some way. One of your siblings might be more attractive than you are, and so they get more attention from whoever, or they have more friends than you do. They might be better at you in some ways. They might be in some things than you are. They might be more intelligent. They might be more creative. I don't know, whatever. They might have a better job, whatever it might be. And so there's always an element of jealousy and envy in friendships, and I think that's partly why people suppress their emotions so much, because all of that stuff is underneath the surface. If you peered underneath the surface of most friendships, but especially men's friendships, you would find that there's a heap of insecurities and at least some degree of jealousy between those people in some ways. But with men, we're expected to just push all that stuff aside and pretend that we're all equal and we're all one, because we all have this similar bond that we come together and share time. And that doesn't mean that it doesn't mean that there aren't like good moments that you have with friends. Of course there are. We can all have a laugh and have some good times, but I think ultimately a lot of it just comes down to distracting ourselves from the nature of the ego battles that are going on. Essentially a fight for dominance, really. There's always a fight for dominance among men. I think it's just a natural instinct, really. It's, as I said, our competitive urge to want to be... There's always something to gain from being the dominant one, or at least being perceived as the dominant one, the confident one, the happy-go-lucky type, the sort of type A personality type, And if you don't fit into that dynamic, or you're perceived to not be of that caliber, then you will always be the mockery of the group. You will always become the source of others' entertainment. You know, you'll always be the butt of a joke. You'll always be at the receiving end of other people's so-called banter, and you will find that you will find that a lot of it comes. It's just a lot of it's as I've said. You know, there's two words that essentially you could sum up with human nature. Well, three actually. That you could sum up with friendships or just human nature in general, and that's conditionality, transactional, and contradictory. There would be, if I was to sum up human nature, those are the three words I would use. Because there are a lot of things with people that often don't make sense, and there are things that, there are so many different situations in which friends will do things with other friends that they won't do with you, or things that they talk about with other friends that they don't talk about with you. And again, they don't tend to tell you about this kind of stuff, but you inevitably end up finding out that through some way or other. And I knew that stuff when I was in high school. I was figuring out that kind of stuff very early on, really. That people just can't be trusted a lot of the time. You can get along with people, I would say. You can have a laugh and a joke and have some fun with people, but I would say ultimately you just can never really trust people. And that's why I think for men, that's why putting their emotions out in many ways is just a big no-no. Because men often realize that, and especially in some circumstances with female friends, or rather female acquaintances or friends of friends, it's just a big no-no. It's just one of those things that you just have to refrain from, because at some point, and not just with women, with men as well, that shit will be used against you at some point. So it's sometimes, you see, I don't know, sometimes men can't win. Like, you can't always win. It doesn't always, sometimes you're just caught in a difficult spot, really. You're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. If you don't share emotions, you're seen as cold and unavailable, especially with women. But even with some men, sometimes if they're a little bit more on the sensitive side and a little bit more emotionally available than others, if you don't open up enough, then you're kind of seen as being too shut off, too closed off, or a bit kind of cold and distant. But then, if you cross a certain line, a line that they never tell you about, then you're seen as too dramatic, as too melodramatic, as you've got a screw loose. There's something wrong with you. You need to go and get help. You're too needy. You're too clingy. You're too this. You're too that. So you just can't win, whatever you do. So I don't know. So sometimes the only thing you can do is just to kind of go along with the crowd, really, as if you want to. I personally don't. I don't like to do that much these days. If I'm honest with you, I just kind of prefer to, if I'm honest, just kind of be myself, because there's just too much drama involved with people, and I have my own problems and my own insecurities, and I don't need. I just don't want to pile on the other. I don't want to be a burden to other people. And that's another part of this whole problem. Men often don't want to burden others with their personal, private stuff, and that's understandable. And you could say it's kind of respectable to a certain degree. But as far as I'm concerned, friends should be able to be comfortable around each other and be comfortable with each other's personal stuff, in my opinion. Because otherwise, your companionships are nothing more than distractions, and nothing more than, people just it's kind of just passing the time, really, just looking for something to do to pass the time, to bat away the boredom, to bat away the existential crisis, to bat away to deal with the monotony of life, to deal with the problems in one's personal lives. And I think, and I understand why people do it, but I just think that I don't think it creates healthy men, in my opinion. I think it creates men that bond in ways that on the surface might be useful in a social setting, let's say, or can be useful, but I don't think it creates healthy people. I really don't. It might be useful for the sake of, to a certain extent, for the sake of work, being professional, I guess. I don't know, I just... I just think you have to be... To me, I don't want to be with someone that's cold or distant. I don't want to be around people like that. But I also don't want to be around people that are too over the top either. And I like to think, or at least I try to be, somewhere in the middle, a bit of both. I can have a laugh, I can take the piss a little bit, I can do a bit of banter, I can be a little bit witty and, tongue in cheek and kind of, boisterous, I guess, at times in my own ways. But I also kind of know that, I'm very good at reading social cues, and I'm good at knowing when generally speaking, I like to think that I'm good at recognizing when I'm kind of being a bit annoying and obnoxious, and that's when I try to tone it down a bit. And I think, again, these are things that people don't talk about. We all are all quietly reading body language. We're all quietly taking subtle cues from people. We don't talk about it, but we kind of know when someone's kind of annoyed or is in a bad mood with us for some reason, or we're getting on somebody's nerves, even though if we don't always mean to. So I don't know. I guess what I'm saying is that I just find a lot of interactions with men exhausting for me personally. I don't know what it's like for you, but I just find it really tiring because there's just so much going on. There's so much to interpret. There's so much. I don't know. I'm just always trying to get. I'm always trying to suss people out. I'm always trying to suss what's really going on in the conversation and what people are really saying, or trying to read between the lines of what people are saying a lot of the time. And I don't mean that that I'm necessarily suspicious of people. I think that everyone's got some hidden agenda. I just mean that what do they really mean? What do they? Because sometimes people people speak in vague terms. People speak in general ways, and people say things in a way that avoids people getting upset. But what they often mean is something else. But they can't. They feel that they can't be honest about it because it's not because they're malicious. They're not malicious in any way. But it's just that I think most men don't want to create a scene with other men because there's always the threat of combativeness. There's always a threat of an argument that gets out of control that ends up becoming violent. And so I think men often bond over things as a way to protect themselves and others from that potential outcome. But I do think if men were more honest with each other, you wouldn't end up like that. I don't think it's not just about honesty. It's about emotional maturity. It's emotional maturity that I believe is the main problem with men. I don't think a lot of men have the maturity that they should have to deal with You see, I think humour is a form of immaturity, in my opinion. It's a form of defensiveness. It's basically a way of saying, I'm not comfortable with you. I'm not comfortable being around you and sharing and letting you and revealing or letting you see my insecurities to the point where they could be weaponized against me. That's what it comes down to. It's humour, as much as it is a form of entertainment, is actually in a way a form of self-protectionism. It's a form of security to which it's kind of it's kind of like being in the there's a reason why I think that like being in the forces tends to appeal to a lot of men, is because there's a sense of that we're all the same. So there's sort of that we're all together. There's a unification of it. There's less of a perceived threat of a clashing of egos, and it's like we're all that's probably why men do so well in teams, because there's we're putting our egos aside. It's like we're able to and that's why a lot of the time bonding in the ways that men usually bond happens in the ways that it does, because it's a way for men to often either put their egos aside or funnel or propel their egos into something that's more healthy, that's more, or at least healthier than arguing and getting into confrontations with other men. See, it's difficult, I think, for men to be emotional. Not just because of the fact that it's a dangerous zone, isn't it? It's often a dangerous zone for men to be vulnerable. Not only because it's hard to truly open up and be honest, because you suppress stuff for so long that by the time the emotions do come out, it could come out in unhealthy ways. It could become amplified because you've been suppressing for so long that it kind of gets a bit exaggerated, which is probably why a lot of men tend to have bad tempers, to be aggressive in some ways. It's not because they're aggressive people necessarily, it's because they're holding so much shit in that by the time it gets released, it can be really frightening. It can be really scary for other people. And that's why I think a lot of men suppress it. But what they don't realise is that by suppressing it, is you're by letting things fester, by letting things grow, it's not actually helping you in any way. In the long term, it's just gonna make you're gonna end up getting caught in feedback loops, because by suppressing your emotions, you're basically telling yourself that it's not okay to be emotional. And then when it calls for a situation where you should be emotional, it either comes out very dramatically or it gets pushed down more and more and more and more and more. And eventually you end up having a nervous breakdown. And I think that's why so many men do go through that kind of a thing. It's a years or decades long process of repression, suppression, to which someone gets to a point where their nervous system collapses, essentially, because they've been holding too much in, and the body just can't handle it anymore. And it becomes, and then at that point, men either start to then turn to very unhealthy ways of coping, which again can sometimes be seen as bonding over things with other men, but actually I think it becomes, initially it's a form of entertainment, but I think over time, I think a lot of bonding turns toxic, because it becomes a way to cope rather than it just being a source of joy, a source of fun. It's a coping mechanism for men. they don't feel that they can be, they don't feel that they can express themselves properly, and so they push all of their inner dark energy, let's call it, into other things. Now, sometimes that creates great things, art, music, technology, etc., architecture, paintings, whatever. But in other ways, it could become really damaging for other people. It can turn into drinking, gambling, being impulsive, womanizing, a midlife crisis probably. It becomes toxic, dysfunctional, blowing money on left, right, and centre that you either don't have, or you should be using for something else. It's treating other people around you like crap because you're in a constantly irritable mood, because you feel like a failure in some way. And I think there's that element to it as well, as that if a man feels like he's a failure, if he's perceived as being vulnerable, that he's failed as far as other men are concerned. It's almost like a competition to see how, it's almost weirdly, it's like a competition to see how long someone can go before they snap. How much can you tolerate? How much can you keep inside? How much can you? And so that's often where a lot of this kind of pseudo respect comes in. It's not so much about actual genuine respect. It's more about keep your shit at bay, keep your stuff at a distance from me. Because if you open up and tell me what's going on with you in this way or that way, I'm not gonna have the same respect for you anymore. It's kind of like with women, how women want the chase, they like the whole thing of the chase, and then when they get to jump into bed with a guy, they don't really respect him anymore. It's like they got what they wanted. The thrill's gone away, the novelty's gone. It's kind of like that, I suppose. It's this thing of there's this kind of sickening kind of entertainment value of watching men struggle with their own problems. There's a kind of societal disease somewhere in there, I think, of watching men struggle to. Yeah, and the thing is, it's like anytime we do see a guy get emotional as well, it's like I've noticed, it's a really bizarre thing. It can be really heartbreaking at times to see it, because it's that it's genuine a lot of the time. But also there are times where it kind of seems a bit pathetic, almost like it seems a bit kind of. I don't know why I feel that way sometimes. I don't know if it's because it's a projection of my own insecurities, my own subconscious mind, is some aware of it. I'm not sure, but I don't know. I just find it. I think men find it uncomfortable in general being around other men that are emotional. I think they just find it, and it's because we're not used to it. We're so used to pushing it away, pushing it aside, pushing it down, that when we do see it, we don't know what to do with it. We don't know how to handle people's emotional vulnerabilities. We don't know what to do with that, and we don't really get taught how to deal with it as men. We're told to just, kind of just stop being weak, stop crying, grow up, grow a pair of balls, man up. Until one day, that man has a fucking nervous breakdown, because. And that's the only point. That stage, that's when usually a man tends to be a bit more healthier with his emotions. And I think a lot of men do go through that. They will inevitably reach a stage where they've been holding so much stuff back. Resentments, disappointments, annoyances with people, levels of disrespect from their male companions, maybe even their partners, frustrations at work, financial problems, you name it. And I think it just piles up, men don't deal with it. Often they don't. They think they're dealing with it because they think that, oh, well, if I just go to the gym, or if I just get that woman, or if I just make that amount of money, or if I just get this promotion, that everything will be all right. But what they don't realise then is then it'll be the next thing, and the next thing, and the next thing, and the next thing. See, men are never really satisfied. Men always want the next thing. They're always looking for the next victory. You know, how many press-ups can I do? Well, okay, well I've achieved 50 now. Well, now I must do 100. Right, I've done 100, so now I must do 150. But now I've got to do 250. And it's just this constant thing with battle with oneself, this constant, endless competition to be the best, you know, be the best you can be. Now, that has its place. There's nothing wrong with being ambitious. There's nothing wrong with setting targets for yourself and trying to be better at certain things in life. But I think there comes a point where I think it becomes unhealthy. It becomes unrealistic. It becomes damaging because you're seeking something. You're looking for the light at the end of the tunnel, and you're trying to get to it, but you know it's out of reach. You know, there's only so many steps you can get towards it before you get. You know, it's like being on an elastic band or something like that. You just get snapped back into place every day. You can do so much, but every now and again you'll get snapped back into reality. You know? And there is only so much the human body can do. There's only so much the human mind can do. The human mind can take, you know, before it snaps at some point. So it's all going to well being competitive and ambitious and being motivated, and that's great. You know, those are good qualities. I'm not saying they're not, but I think with men we're never satisfied. We're always looking, pushing all the time to fill something in us. I've got to get that job. I've got to get that amount. You know, I've got to get that salary. I've got to get this. I've got to get that. I've got to get that new car. I've got to get this. I've got to get that. I've got to have that woman. You know, it's a constant battle with one's ego 24 hours a day. I must be respected. I must be liked. I must be validated. I must get that approval from someone. You know, I must be seen as cool, as edgy, as interesting, as popular, as respectable. You know, and I think it just becomes. I think, in my opinion, it's a bit of a disease, really. It's an eternal. It's an eternal struggle with one's ego, that the ego takes over. Now, you know, there's a place for the ego in terms of being competitive in society, in terms of being competitive in the world of business, finance, to get that job or career you want and to be successful in it and to reach a certain stage. And, you know, as I said, that has its place, but you know, the problem with type A personalities is that they never know when to stop. They never know when they nothing is ever enough for them. You know, and that's why the world is run by type A personalities. It's, you know, the most successful people in the world are those that have sacrificed their morals, their emotional vulnerabilities, that you know, that they've pushed everything down for so long that they no longer feel human anymore. You know, they gave everything up for money, for success, for fame, for popularity, for stardom. You know. And I think in the end that it's often about that with men. It's you know, if you're not the type A personality, then you better have something in that situation. You better have something that those other more dominant people around you are going to respect you for, because if you're not, you'll soon find yourself being seen. You'll be scapegoat. You'll be the target of all. People will be laughing at you, not with you. And that's the thing that I've found in my own personal experiences with men in life, is that I've been around people that are a bit more dominant than I am, in whether it's with their sense of humour, with their intellect. And I accept that, I accept that I have been insecure, and I am in some ways still insecure. And that is my problem. That there's no doubt about that. That's on me. But at least I have the self-awareness, enough of my own self-awareness to accept that. But, if you're not seen as someone if you're not seen as an equal in a group, whether it's with men or women, then people won't want to listen to you. People won't want to be around you. People won't take what you say seriously. And you will never be seen as the popular one. The popular one in any male-based dynamic is the one that often it's not so much just has the biggest ego, although that's part of it. It's the one that partly it's to do with, I suppose, perceived resources or perceived benefits, I guess. Or there's something that person has that could help you in some way, that benefits you in some sense. Otherwise you wouldn't be around them, really. That's essentially what most connections are with people. That there's something to gain from it. There's an advantage to it. There's a benefit to being around that person. And if your emotions get in the way of, or could potentially threaten their dominance in some way, then you're seen as the problem. You are the problem, and you must be dealt with. You must be put down. You must be put back in your place. And that extends to the wider society. It is unfortunately a part of the way that the world dominates. Capitalism dominates the infrastructures of many parts of the West. Especially if you live in a country that's dominated by class, you're expected to know your place all the time. If you're not worthy of respect, then you're not worthy of attention. If someone doesn't respect you, then they often don't like you. That's as simple as that, really. These are things that people don't talk about a lot of the time. You might hear some of it spoken about in the black pill community on YouTube, but not enough. And it's because we all want to feel like we're part of one unified thing, that we're all seen as being on the same level, that we're all seen as being that we should all have an equal level of respect. And while we should all respect each other, let's not kid ourselves here and pretend that we all respect each other the same, because we don't. There are some people in the community that respect others more than others. That's just a fact. That's just a harsh reality of it. Some people are just more naturally likable, I guess. Some people are just more likable than others for whatever reason. They're more educated than you are. They're more knowledgeable. They're more eloquent. They're more. They have a much better vocabulary. They have a much better way of explaining things, or being more kind of relatable, being more personal, being more interesting in the way in which they approach things. And even in the black pill community, there's a lot of jealousy. There's a lot of bitterness there, I feel. There's a lot of competition, which to me is a really fucking weird thing, really. A community that's supposedly supposed to be about everyone coming together, but there is no real such thing as unity. Not in its true sense. There'll always be unequal balances. There'll always be an unequal amount of power, of respect, of resources, of popularity, and that's why YouTube is what it is. That's why capitalism is what it is. That's why the world operates in the way it does. Everything's about competition for finite resources, and that extends to human dynamics. It extends to relationships, friendships, dynamics between employees and their bosses, and people's co-workers. It's always there. There's always some kind of insecurities, resentment, some kind of bitterness somewhere, and it's just we live in a toxic world. We're full of a lot of toxic people, sadly, and I find sometimes it's difficult to accept. It's difficult to think about, and you can find yourself in a kind of existential tension or frustration, or a kind of existential maze, mentally speaking, at times, because you do think to yourself, what peace is there? Where am I ever going to find any real sense of peace or comfort in this life? If you can't find it in your friendships or in your relationships, where can you find it? I think sometimes you just basically end up having to shut your mind up. Basically the only way to really cope in this world, as far as I can tell at 35 years of age, nearly 36, is that basically you just have to pretend, and that's what most people do. They just pretend. People either just don't really know what's really going on, or they pretend not to know, or they just don't really want to think about it. It's just too much to think about. It's too dark. It's too deep. It's too serious. And I get it. I completely understand. It is. Hence, why so many people bond over things like distractions, coping mechanisms. Shopping, holidays, having kids, even, you could even say. A legacy. Just anything that distracts us from the various degrees of headfuckery that this world is in many people's minds. It's better to. It may be in some ways it's better to be a bit fake than it is to deal with all of the bullshit that this life throws at you. All of the harsh realities of what it is to be a human being amongst other human beings in a society that you have very little control over, amongst other people that you don't always like, you don't always want to be around, amongst other people you don't really want to tolerate, you don't really want to spend any attention on. And this is the dark nature of what it is to be a human being, because you can't just shut it all off. You can't just pretend it doesn't all exist. But at some point you do have to go out there into the world and deal with the world as it is. Rather than your own idealized version, your own utopian version of reality in your own head, you have to deal with the world as you see it, as you face it. And that's really difficult for someone who's a deep thinker, who's extremely introspective, who maybe sometimes ruminates on things, and realizes that the world that I was sold to me as a kid, I was a teenager, even in some ways as a young adult, is not the world that is actually out there. You know, that I was sold a lie. I was sold so many different fairy tales, you know, that I've only, I suppose, only really woken up to. I was sold so much naivety. I was sold into a system essentially of capitalism, of commercialism, consumerism, marketing, advertising, sales. You know, and you're just expected to play along with it all. You're expected to accept that it's all normal, that it's all okay, that everything's fine and wonderful. And, you know, sometimes maybe you do. As much as I hate to say it, you know, sometimes maybe you just have to just, you know, and that's why so many people buy into. That's why so many people bought into technology, the internet, social media, the smartphone, AI, humanoid robots, you know, whatever the next generations of tech will be. You know, you can look back through the last couple of decades, you know, various gadgets and, you know, tech trends, etc., fashion trends, music trends, and it's all there because of money. Primarily, it's about money, but I would say more than anything else, it's distraction. It's all distraction. It all helps you to prevent. It pushes away the fucking brutal nature of what it is to fucking be a self-aware, introverted, introspective person in this world, because it's fucking brutal, man. It's really fucking dark. And, you know, there is an element of existential terror in there. You know, when you start to really, truly wake up and see the truth of almost everything that you once felt a sense of comfort about, you don't know how to handle life anymore. You don't know how to interpret life anymore. You don't know where you stand in the world anymore. You don't know if you will ever find any peace ever again. And that's where I found myself recently. I'd love to have some male friends again. I'd love to have some people I could hang out with, but I just would never be able to trust them. I don't think I will ever trust people ever again. Which is you know, it's a real shame. I can, you know, like I said, I can get along with people. I can have a laugh. You know, I've got a good sense of humor. I like to think anyway. And you know, I like a bit of fun, like anybody. But I don't know. Sometimes you just have to ask yourself, you know, maybe you just have to prioritize certain things in the end. You know, you just have to. Maybe you just have to pretend. Maybe that's how you have to live your life. So if you want to be happy, you have to pretend. You have to push away all of the other thoughts and almost pretend that you never had them. Maybe that's what happiness is. It's to pretend that the world is something that it's not. It's to live in a kind of created ignorance, you know. To live in denial, even though you know what the truth is. It's to live in this bubble of denial, of fakery, let's say, to kind of create a mind, the world, a utopian, idealized world in your own head, so that you can cope. That's why people long so much for hope. That's why people have ideals. That's why people want to see the best in people, because there is nothing else in this world that you can cling on to apart from hope. Everything changes, everything moves, everything breaks down, dies eventually. And, you know, at some point, the only thing you have left is is a sense of hope. Hope that you might be able to one day trust some people enough that you can call them friends, Trust somebody enough that you can build a relationship with them again. Trust people enough that you can go out there and keep a stable job and get along with your co-workers. Yeah, I've always tried to be a decent friend. I've always tried to be open and honest and funny, and to some extent, I've tried to be likable by being funny, but I found myself at some point in my late 20s just getting so exhausted by it all that I just shut it all off in the end. I just said, I can't deal with this because this is too exhausting for me. That's when I quit my job. That's when I stopped hanging around with people. That's when I stopped going to clubs. And I just gradually just didn't bother with people anymore. I just did, and I didn't really care. I was quite happy to be by myself. I didn't mind just being alone with my dogs and having the conversation with my brother or my sister or whatever. Or every now and again somebody might send you a random message, but apart from that, it doesn't really bother me that much. But of course, in the back of my mind, I would love to be able to have a few friends that I could go and hang out with, but I'm not. I'm not in my 20s anymore. I'm in my mid-30s, and it's easy to forget that a lot of the things that a lot of friendships that are built on kind of like surface level stuff, superficial stuff. That's all good and well when you're still kind of learning and growing, and you're essentially a bit of a kind of rebellious kind of overgrown teenager or whatever. But I think as you get older, there are certain, you want a bit more depth in life. And I think the reason that I kind of cut a lot of people away is because I couldn't find it. I didn't find that depth in people that I was looking for, which is why I ended up in my early to mid-20s with older friends. I spent more time with people much older than me than I did with people my own age. And it's because I was more philosophical for my age, perhaps more, in some ways, more philosophically mature than other people my own age. And I didn't find certain connections in people, I suppose, that I would have liked. And so I just kind of gave up on it. I lost hope. I became apathetic with people and friendships in general, especially around men. Because I always felt like I had to fit in. I always felt this sense that I couldn't just be myself. I wasn't allowed to be myself. I was always the butt of, I always had to be, at the receiving end of someone's so-called banter or, piss taking. And I just, in the end, I was just like, I don't have to tolerate this. I don't have to put up with it, and I'm not gonna. Then that's why I ended up on my own. Because people didn't like me and I didn't like them. And so in the end, I just said, you know what, I'm fine. I'm not going to deal with this anymore. I'm not going to sit here and fit myself into something that I don't fit into just for your benefit, just so that you're happy. That's not friendship. That's control. That's toxicity. That's dysfunctionality. That's not a friendship. It's a situation in which you're expected to accommodate other people's expectations of you, what they want of you, not what you naturally are. And that's how I found a lot of people in the end. That they want a version of you that suits them rather than the way that you genuinely actually really are. And people often they don't like you being deep or introspective or talking about deep, important stuff. They don't like it. Because either they don't have that, they can't match you on it. They feel insecure, they feel inadequate in some way, or their interests are more about superficial things or things, typical male, young guy stuff. And I'm not fucking interested in that fucking bullshit anymore, quite frankly. You know, I'm heading towards my 40th birthday, and I don't want to talk about fucking sports. I don't want to talk about fucking gaming. I'm not 14. I want to talk about some fucking real shit. Some stuff that really matters to me. That we should talk about. Let's talk about robotics. Let's talk about AI. Let's talk about philosophy. Let's talk about psychology. Let's talk about the shit that we should be talking about. Instead of, oh, who scored that goal, or fucking what was the score of this fucking football match, or whatever it was. I couldn't give a fuck, quite frankly. I couldn't give a shit about that stuff. That never appealed to me. I mean, don't get me wrong, I can watch a bit of sports, and I don't mind a bit of gaming. I don't want to fucking talk about it. I want to talk about something interesting. I don't want to waste my time and energy talking about things that we would have talked about when we were 12. You know, let's talk about some mature adult shit. How about that for a change? That's all I'm saying. If you want to fucking talk about how many fucking women you've shagged, or how many fucking, you know, vodkas you can neck down, yeah, or how much money you made this week, then fucking go and find your little clique of people that are interested in that kind of garbage. Because I ain't one of them. I assure you. I couldn't give a fuck about that shit. I'm not interested in that kind of stuff, really. It's just not who I am. And if it means that I have to become something that I'm not, just to be seen as someone that fits in, to be respected, then it's not worth my time. Because it means you don't respect me. You only respect me until the point where I actually start to reveal the cracks in the facade, where I start to reveal the truth about somebody, or I start to reveal parts of myself that you don't align with, that you don't like, that you don't share something in common with. And then you suddenly see how fragile that respect was. So people are full of shit. Men are full of shit all the time. You know, men lie about all sorts of stuff. Men's egos get the better of them all the time. You know, their dick precedes them, their ego precedes them. You know, it's men are so full of shit a lot of the time. You know, that's why they're so good at bonding over meaningless crap. You know, just like it's just anything just to push the darkness away, anything to avoid having to be open and honest about anything. Oh, God forbid. Fucking hell, sin of the fucking millennia. What's so wrong in being emotional? What's so bad about it? What's so bad about being a little bit sensitive every now and again? Always being emotional. Deflect it as soon as you possibly can. Make a quick joke. Make some quick banter. Push it away. That's what men do. Most men do that. All the time. They won't say it, but we know, everyone knows that's what's going on. I just don't want to be around that kind of shit, really. Now, I see it in the ways that people interact in live chats as well, like in various streams that I've seen on YouTube or and whatever. You know, you see it all the time of people just trying to combat stuff and, you know, prey on people's vulnerabilities and weaknesses, and you just see, you know, you just see just how incredibly vile people really are when you strip away all the superficiality shit. When you strip away the surface small talk bullshit, you really do see just how vile a lot of people really truly are. And for that reason, I personally, as much as I would in some ways like to have a social circle, if I'm being honest with you, I really couldn't give a fuck if I never have friends ever again. Quite frankly, I really don't care now. All right, I'm going to be middle-aged before I know it. I don't give a fuck about having friends, and I don't care. I'll be in the fucking grave before I know it. You know, if somebody can match me, if someone is similar to me and I come across them, then I'll give them a chance. You know, I hope they give me a chance. But apart from that, I'm not going to fucking like just sit there and let people talk shit about me or ridicule me or mock me or use me as a source of entertainment or banter or humour for everybody else's benefit. And I'm expected to just sit there and put up with it. That shit ain't happening. Because I don't give a fuck who you are. You ain't going to fucking sit there and disrespect me. I tell you that now. You ain't going to do that to me ever again. I don't give a fuck who you are. I'd love to have some people to call friends. But do you know what? The more I feel, the older I get, the more that I realise, you know what? I'm just better off on my own. I can't trust people. I probably never will ever again. I don't really like the average person, if I'm honest with you. I can tolerate people. It's the best I can say. I can tolerate people, but in the end, I think if I'm being completely honest with you, I just prefer my own company. Because there's just too much drama, too many games, too many things going on with people that I don't want anything to do with, and they don't want anything to do with my shit. So in the end, I just think, you know what, and then just fuck it. Fuck it. I'd just rather be fucking on my own. I'd rather be alone for the rest of my life than deal with all that crap. Fucking sad, isn't it? It's sad to say that. I don't like having to say that, but it's the truth. You know, I can tolerate people in short bursts, but I find it extremely difficult to tolerate people for hours on end. You know, I've probably just been isolated for so long now, so institutionalized by loneliness and boredom and distrust and apathy that I don't think I'll ever function normal again. And that's heartbreaking to say that in some ways, because while I have a degree of hope, the truth is that I just think that I'm just too far gone at this point. Too far, I'm just beyond it. You know, I just don't really care anymore. I think in the end, you end up in a place in life where you have to prioritize your own well-being, your own mental health, and what you value, what you truly value, what means something to you. And if you can't find it, then you're better off being by yourself. Sure, you have to go out into the world sometimes. You don't have much choice, and sometimes you happen to come across someone, you know, randomly or whatever, or something happens, or you know, you have an experience that bonds you together in some way, whatever. But I'm not saying that I'm never going to ever have friends again, but I'm just saying that I'm going to be much, 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 much more picky in the future with the kind of people that I want around me than I was in the past. That's all I'm saying. I'm going to be much more selective about it, much more careful. Because it's not about quantity. It's about quality, the quality of friendships, the quality of the people around you. And more than anything else, it's about trust and respect. And if you've got neither of those things, or you feel that someone's not providing you with those things, then that friendship is worth shit. It's worth nothing. It's all good and well saying you've got friends and hanging out with people and drinking, smoking and having a laugh. But when shit really hits the fan, how many of those people will really be there for you? How many of those people really, truly, genuinely like you deep down? Not all of them. If you're lucky in this world, you might find a handful of people in your entire life that you could rely on, that had you back, that trusted you. But the vast majority of them out there are lying, deceiving, manipulative, gaslighting, using scumbags. If they think they can use you for something, they will. If they think they can get something out of you for some reason that leverage, some kind of leverage, some kind of something that could boost their own lives in somewhere, or something that you've got that they haven't, or access to someone that they want, that you know, that you like, or something, whatever it might be, then they'll do it. Because that's what people are really like. That's human nature. Not everybody, no, but I would say 70-80% of the population. Everybody wants something out of you. They want something from you. They always want something. It's your job to try and figure it out. Because they won't tell you. And I got tired of trying to figure out. I got tired of being suspicious of people. I didn't want to be suspicious. I didn't want to be paranoid around people. But I ended up feeling that way because I didn't feel like I could trust people. Now, yeah, that's part of my, again, that's on me. That's my fault for whatever reasons, just not being able to trust people. And I think, and I personally, I think it's a wise thing to do. You know, the less you trust people, the less you're going to be disappointed in the world. The less you expect of people, the less you're going to be disappointed. And so if you've got no friends, you'll never be disappointed. But you'll always have that loneliness. But in the end, what you have to decide, well, do I want to be lonely with people, or do I want to be alone do I want to deal with loneliness in and of my own comfort of my own home? Only you can decide that. One way or other, you're going to be lonely at some point in your life. That's guaranteed. Friends will move on. Friends will throw you to the side for somebody else. Friends will die. Friends will move away to other parts of the city or other parts of the world. People will get married. They'll have kids. They'll settle down. They'll get bogged down in their careers. And you won't hear from people ever again. Or not for years. And even if you do, things have changed. You've changed. Time's moved on. You're not the same person you was. You know, the only thing you can go, really, but the best thing you can do is to, if you can, is to try and hold on to some friends that you had from school, I suppose, in a way, if you can do that. But it's not always possible. Sometimes friendships just dwindle over time. They just go by the wayside. It doesn't matter what you do. It's just naturally things just kind of fall apart. Best thing you can do is to try and keep developing friends if you can. If you genuinely think you can trust them, then, you know, go ahead. Because loneliness is a hard thing to deal with. Very hard. Because when you become lonely, you become apathetic. And when you become apathetic, you become existential. And you get stuck in this, as I've been for many years now, this state of existential questioning, you know, looking for value, looking for meaning in the world. Does my life have any value or meaning in it anymore? If I haven't got any money, if I haven't got any friends, if I haven't got anything to show for myself, if I haven't got a real career, if I haven't got a house, if I haven't got this or this sorted, and you just end up in this cycle of like, well, what's the point of it all? What am I living for? What am I getting up for in the morning? What does any of it mean anymore? I don't know. I don't have the answers. That's the problem with existential things. You can come up with the questions, but you can never find the answers. You know, philosophy is kind of philosophy in a nutshell. It's great to think, but you can often you end up getting stuck in dilemmas. You kind of get stuck in a kind of a place in which, no matter how you think about it, there isn't an answer for you. So it's just this sense of kind of hopelessness, this helplessness, this desperation, this seeking of solitude that you can't find, and it leads to trauma. I think it causes existential trauma. And sometimes you think to yourself, well, even if I found some new friends, would I be able to sustain them? Am I the problem? Maybe I am the problem. Maybe it's me. Maybe it's not everybody else. Maybe I am the problem here. I'm certainly not perfect, and I certainly accept that, as I've said throughout the video, that I have my own issues, and that doesn't help sometimes, and I accept that. But I am only a human being. And I've been far more self-aware and accommodating and respectful to other people than a lot of people have been toward me of these. I can guarantee you that. Far more than I ever should. Far, far more. And that's the problem. I don't want to find myself in that spot anymore. And I'm not gonna. I'm just not going to do it. I'm not going to do it anymore. You have to just decide what you want in the end in life. You have to just say to yourself, look, I don't want this shit anymore. Based on your experience and your wisdom, you get to a point where you just say, look, been down that route, been down there, done this, done that, not interested. Been there, done that, got the t-shirt, never again. That's all you can do. That's all you've got in the end, is your experiences, your wisdom, your intuition, your insights, your self-awareness. And that's it. That's all you've got. Those are your companions. Those become your friends in the end. Your own faults become your friends. Because you've got nothing left. You've got nobody else to rely on. That can get really dark. Very, very dark. And as AI, before I go here, but as AI develops, and it will get more and more and more and more incredibly intelligent as time goes on, more capable, you may eventually find that there will be an epidemic of loneliness in this world, I suspect, because more and more people will find that the AI is a far better companion than most people could ever be. That's the future. When humanoids become commonplace in most people's homes that have AI developed into them, obviously, then again, that'll become more of a companion than the average person will be. To be more interesting, more insightful, and you won't have to tolerate certain things because that's often what a lot of friendships are, is tolerating other people so that until you get something, there's something that you like in that friendship, that dynamic, but there's a lot of tolerating going on. I don't really want to do that anymore. I don't really want to tolerate other people's shit, and I don't really want people to have to tolerate mine anyway either. So, but anyway, that's all I think. That's all I can really say about the whole thing. It's I want to have friends, but I don't. I want to trust people, but I don't know if I can. I like some ways in which men bond through, but I also think in some ways it can be very toxic and unhealthy and unhelpful for everyone involved, because it's just delaying and denying reality in many respects. I think men, in some ways, men built the world because of their competitiveness, really. Without that, the world would never have become what it is. So I'm not saying there isn't a place for the kind of very core raw human nature of men. But I do think when it comes to meaningful, valuable, interesting dynamics, conversations especially, I think it's very difficult, I think, in a group of men to be somebody like me. In my experience, I found it almost impossible. And so you end up inevitably having to play a role that, in a sense, others have kind of, sort of like created for you, because you become a kind of jester. You feel that you have to put on the clown costume to fit in, to be liked, to be seen, to be heard, to be respected, to be somebody that should get some degree of attention, even if you're not the most dominant or popular one. But you might be funny, or you might be likable in some way, so people tolerate you. You know, at the end of the day, you've got it. Only you can decide what you want. Only you can decide what you think should be your priorities in life. What you think is worth tolerating. Only you can make that choice. It's your life. You know, I don't have all the answers. I don't think anybody really does. We're all trying to figure this shit out as we go along, as we get older, as we get wiser and less ignorant and less naive. But as I said before, you know, maybe the only really way to be happy in this world is to be naive, is to be ignorant. As they say, ignorance is bliss. So true. I used to be a lot happier as a teenager, much happier than I am now. I didn't care about half the shit I talk about, the things I think about. Life does that to you, man. Life just crushes down on you over time. It becomes overbearing, it becomes overwhelming, and you're forced to fucking confront this shit. Whether you like it or not, it doesn't matter. You know, that's what life does. It grinds away, slowly but surely. Shit happens to you, you know, and it makes you fucking resentful, it makes you bitter, it makes you angry, it makes you frustrated. And you're left to ponder on all. Because if you can't talk about it with other people, then you've only got yourself to talk about it with. Or AI now is becoming the more popular thing to do. But I'm going to leave it there for today. You know, I hope you've found some kind of useful insight or insights through this video. Hope it resonated with you in some way, and I'll catch you on another video at some point in the coming days. Thank you very much. Bye bye.